unir y luego vamos a dar inicio.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get going. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I did just want to turn it over to, or let everyone know that this workshop does have Spanish interpretation. So to start, I'd like to turn it over to our interpreter, who will be providing some instructions to us today.
Buenas tardes a todos. Nada más quería avisarles que esta reunión también estará disponible en español. Entonces, una de las intérpretes lo va a explicar ahorita. Como se dijo, buenas tardes. Si ustedes están utilizando una computadora, favor de localizar el icono con figura de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla cuando este aparezca en un minuto y luego pulsen en interpretación de lenguaje, dice Language Interpretation, y seleccionen el idioma español. Si están conectándose desde su teléfono, iPad o dispositivo similar, busquen el menú con los 3 puntitos en la esquina superior del lado derecho de su pantalla y pulsen Interpretación de lenguaje y luego el español. Esto permite que escuchen la traducción al español con un 80% de volumen y el audio en inglés se escuchará al fondo con un 20% de volumen. Tienen la opción de apagar el audio en inglés pulsando Mute Original Audio, ubicado en el mismo menú donde eligieron el idioma español. Gracias. For those of you who speak English and only want to hear what is being said in English, you will also need to choose the English channel. From your computer, you will, in a moment, at the bottom of your screen, a globe will appear, and that's where you're going to click on for interpretation. Then you're going to select English if you're choosing English. If you are connecting from an iPhone or iPad or some other sort of device that's similar, you're going to look in the top right of your screen to the 3 little dots, click on the menu. Also, you'll see then the globe and then choose language interpretation there and English. Thank you so much. Eso concluyen las instrucciones. Entonces ahora se va a activar los canales. The channel should activate in a few moments.
Great. Thank you. And Melina, just let me know when that's ready.
It's already ready.
Okay, great. Thank you. And first, just some housekeeping items for this workshop. This workshop is being recorded. The recording will be posted on our website and YouTube page shortly after the meeting. Audio abilities for attendees are disabled by default. If you're an attendee, you'll need to be unmuted by the host to speak. Panelists are able to mute and unmute on their own. If you have questions, we kindly request that you use the Q&A feature in Zoom, so APCD staff can track them more efficiently. Comments can be submitted in writing via the chat feature in Zoom anytime during the presentation or verbally at the conclusion of the presentation. APCD staff will attempt to answer as many questions as possible during the webinar today and provide an opportunity for as many comments as possible at the conclusion of the presentation. Comments can also be submitted directly to me via email no later than November 30th, 2022. There will be more opportunities for public comment and participation as we move ahead. Finally, if you're unable to virtually access Zoom at any point during the presentation, you can also use your telephone to call in. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the 2022 Regional Air Quality Strategy Public Workshop. My name is Nick Cormier, and I'm an air quality specialist with the Air Pollution Control District. With me today are a number of my colleagues at APCD who are on hand to assist with answering questions in their respective fields of expertise. We're happy that you've taken the time out of your busy day to be with us this afternoon to talk about the very important issue of reducing ozone pollution in San Diego County. Here's an overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll again provide a few workshop logistics. Next, we'll discuss the nature of the ozone pollution problem in San Diego County. We'll then provide a brief background on the region's state ozone plan, known locally as the Regional Air Quality Strategy, or RAQS. Then we'll summarize the sections of the new RAQS that APCD has drafted for public comment. And finally, we'll take your feedback and suggestions following the presentation. First, let's go over some workshop logistics. If you'd like to participate in the webinar, you have one of three options in Zoom. If you'd like to submit written comments or have issues using Zoom during the meeting, please use the chat feature. If you'd like to be put in the queue to provide verbal questions or comments at the conclusion of today's presentation, please use the raise hand button, and APCD staff will then call and unmute you when prompted. Finally, if you'd like to submit written comments for APCD to respond to throughout the meeting, we highly encourage you to use the Q&A button in Zoom. Using the Q&A box will allow APCD staff to better track the questions coming in and allow us to respond more efficiently during or after the workshop. Next, I'll provide some background on the ozone pollution problem in San Diego County, why we're required to prepare a state ozone plan, and how it corresponds with our federal ozone plan. But before getting too far ahead, it's important to note that this plan is statutorily mandated to address ozone pollution. APCD is equally concerned about other air pollutants, such as particulate matter, diesel particulate matter, toxic air contaminants, as well as greenhouse gases and climate change. Reducing emissions that cause ozone can reduce emissions of other air pollutants. Thus, reducing ozone can provide co-benefits towards an effective overall emission reduction strategy. It's first important to understand what causes ozone pollution. Ozone pollution is formed when common air pollutants emitted by all types of sources, including vehicles, off-road equipment, factories, consumer products, and other sources, chemically react under the influence of sunlight and heat. The concentration of ozone pollution is as dependent on sunshine and temperature as it is on the presence of ozone-forming emissions. This ozone is harmful to breathe and therefore is regulated as an air pollutant at the state and federal levels. San Diego County's topography makes it well suited to ozone formation. Air pollution is emitted along the coastline and blows eastward, where it cooks under sunlight to form ozone. It then gets trapped against our local mountains and results in higher ozone levels in our inland valleys and foothills. Thus, the district's ozone monitor at Alpine regularly exhibits higher ozone levels than coastal areas in the region. Ground level ozone irritates and inflames air passageways, and typical symptoms include headache, cough, shortness of breath, and chest tightness when taking a deep breath. Children and seniors are at increased risk of health impacts, and so are people with existing lung disease and those who spend time outdoors. And because ozone is fueled by sunshine, ozone concentrations are highest in the spring and summer months. This dynamic is evident on the following map, which shows the number of days that regional ozone monitors exceeded the state ozone standards last year. The red square is our Alpine ozone monitor, which had more than 4 exceedance days. The orange triangles are primarily the district's ozone monitors found in our inland valleys, which include Kearney Mesa and El Cajon, both of which had fewer than 4 exceedances. Lastly, the district's ozone monitors shown by the green circles had no exceedances of ozone standards last year. The monitors in green mainly comprise monitors along the coastline. However, the district's ozone monitor at Donovan Prison near the border also did not exceed state ozone standards. APCD is part of a coordinated 3-tiered approach to regulating and cleaning up ozone and other air pollution. The US EPA regulates emissions from interstate traveling sources, including airplanes, trains, and ships. The California Air Resources Board, or CARB, regulates emissions from on-road and off-road vehicles within California, as well as consumer products we use every day, such as personal care products and household cleaners. APCD has primary responsibility for regulating local stationary sources of air pollution. These include large industrial facilities like power plants and landfills, but also smaller establishments like gas stations and dry cleaners. It's important to characterize emissions in a way that may be more understandable. To do this, consider the following comparison as we use the term of tons per day. 1 ton of NOx emissions emitted per day is approximately equal to the same amount of NOx emissions being emitted from approximately 350,000 average passenger cars per day. To understand where the region is going, it's important to understand the progress the region has made. Ozone precursor emissions, specifically volatile organic compounds, or VOC, and oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, have been trending downward as a result of clean air actions taken over the past 60 years at the local, state, and federal levels. This chart shows that VOC and NOx emissions in San Diego County have dropped 56% just since the year 2000, equivalent to a reduction of 240 tons per day. In fact, ozone precursor emissions in San Diego County are now at their lowest levels on record. These emission reductions have resulted in improved regional air quality. This chart shows the region's 8-hour ozone level as measured at the Alpine Monitoring Station, where ozone levels have trended downward. There is year-to-year variability caused by hotter weather. However, these upticks only reflect a flattening of progress, as opposed to a significant change in the wrong direction. Despite this progress made, it's clear that additional work is needed in order to meet the state 8-hour ozone standard, shown by the red line, and to further protect public health. San Diego's ozone pollution problem is comparable to other large metropolitan areas in California. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison, as each air district has its own meteorology, topography, and mix of emission sources. That said, most regions in California, including the South Coast Air Basin to our north, have also made considerable progress. Nonetheless, each of the air districts shown on this slide are non-attainment for at least one ozone standard, meaning that ozone pollution can still reach unhealthful levels at times in all of these areas. This chart and the one on the following slide show the top 10 sources of ozone precursor emissions in San Diego County. Recent scientific modeling has demonstrated that NOx emissions are the key driver of regional ozone pollution formation, and mobile sources generate over 90% of regional NOx emissions. All of the region's top sources of NOx are mobile sources, including ships, off-road equipment, heavy-duty trucks, aircraft, and passenger vehicles. All of these sources are regulated at the state and federal levels by CARB and EPA. Mobile sources are also some of the largest emitters of VOC, including off-road equipment, boats, passenger cars, and aircraft. However, the largest region-wide source of VOC is consumer products, such as personal care products and household cleaners, which are also regulated by CARB. Other categories the district can and does regulate through adopted local rules. These categories include architectural coatings, such as paints and stains, miscellaneous coatings, petroleum and gas fueling activities, printing, and adhesives. Now that we understand how ozone forms and what causes it, let's now turn our attention to the district's state plan on how we keep planning to reduce it. This plan, known locally as the RACS, is the subject of today's workshop. San Diego County is currently designated as a non-attainment area for state and federal ozone standards. As seen on this map, many of the populated regions in California are also non-attainment for state ozone standards. Because the region is non-attainment, Health and Safety Code requires APCD to prepare a plan to attain the state standards. These standards, also known as health-based standards, define the maximum amount of outdoor ozone allowable to avoid harming public health, averaged over a specific time period. At the state level, CARB has set these levels at 0.070 parts per million, or ppm, over an 8-hour period, and 0.09 parts per million over a 1-hour period. APCD's plan to attain state ozone standards is known locally as the Regional Air Quality Strategy, or RAQS. Initially adopted in 1992 and last updated in 2016, it's periodically updated pursuant to state law as new emission control measures become technologically feasible, improve air quality, or protect public health. Health and Safety Code requires APCD to consider, and if warranted, adopt all feasible measures that can reduce ozone-forming emissions from stationary sources under a regulatory authority. Individual measures included in the RAQS are evaluated and, if warranted, developed into proposed local rules through a public process. Each revision of the RAQS requires approval by the APCD Governing Board and submittal to CARB. The RAQS plan and APCD's Federal Ozone Plan adopted in 2020 complement one another and satisfy different requirements. The 2020 Federal Plan only satisfies federal Clean Air Act requirements, while the RAQS only satisfies California Clean Air Act requirements. And unlike the RAQS, the 2020 Federal Plan requires review and approval by EPA. The 2020 Federal Plan also requires costly modeling to be conducted that scientifically predicts when attainment is likely to occur. Our 2020 Federal Plan predicted we would attain the state and federal 0.070 parts per million standard in 2032. Consequently, any additional measures proposed by APCD in the 2022 RAQS or by CARB or EPA will only accelerate the region's attainment efforts. Let's now discuss the draft 2022 RAQS. The district released a draft of the 2022 RAQS and corresponding CEQA analysis for public comment on October 24th, and is now taking comment on it through November 30th. Please note that today's presentation will only be providing a brief overview of the main sections of the document. We encourage you to review the full document. We welcome all feedback and suggestions and encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. The 2022 RAQS provides a new framework that is more understandable, less technical, and digs into topics that stakeholders want to know about. It's built around a purpose and vision, as foreseen by APCD, that describes requirements of the RAQS and where we think the region may be heading. We then discuss topics that have not been included in previous RAQS updates, such as ozone's relationship with public health, under-resourced communities, greenhouse gases and climate change, and mobile sources. We finally discuss APCD's updated local ozone pollution control strategy with measures APCD will be evaluating over the next 3 to 6 years. Though the 2022 RAQS must primarily address ozone, we can also have parallel goals that address other sources of air pollution. The two overarching goals in the document are to protect public health and to protect the climate. To accomplish them, the 2022 RAQS first focuses on direct emission reductions of ozone precursors, namely NOx and VOC. Concurrently, the RAQS also considers co-benefits and indirect emission reductions of GHGs and PM where applicable. The 2022 RAQS also describes how ozone and other air pollutants impact your health. As mentioned, unhealthy levels of any air pollution can cause a wide variety of health impacts. These impacts and health effects are comprised of the following factors. First is the amount of pollutants being emitted. Next is how much or the concentration of that air pollutant is being measured in the air. Third is how much the population is being exposed to the pollutants in the air, including the frequency and duration. And fourth is the dosage, which is how much of the pollutant is being absorbed into the body. The resulting health effects for individuals are based on these preceding factors. The 2022 RAQS notes some of the resulting health effects from ozone, particulate matter, toxic air contaminants, and greenhouse gases. It also describes the scale of the pollution problem and peak seasons where such impacts occur. Exposure to high ozone levels is primarily a region-wide problem that mainly occurs in the summertime. In comparison, exposures to PM and toxic air contaminants tend to be more localized, and greenhouse gases are a global problem. Additionally, PM levels tend to get higher in the wintertime, while toxic air contaminants and greenhouse gases are a problem year-round. Cleaning the air is not only critical to avoiding these damaging health effects, it's also important to our region's economy. A study done by NRDC recently concluded that air quality regulations will help avoid up to 5,100 premature deaths by 2030 in San Diego County alone. At the same time, the region will realize up to $57 million in monetized benefits from avoided deaths and non-fatal illnesses associated with air pollution. Air pollution health effects are more prevalent in our region's under-resourced communities. These areas, which have been disproportionately impacted by air pollution for decades, require steadfast action and resources to improve existing conditions and improve daily life. Such areas in San Diego County are shown by the maps on this slide. On the left is a map of census tracts identified by California's CalEnviroscreen tool that was particularly impacted by not only air pollution, but also other environmental and socioeconomic burdens. Areas that score highest in comparison to the rest of the state are in red and orange, which include the areas around the port and along the border. Other areas such as Escondido, El Cajon, and parts of Oceanside are also impacted. On the right is a similar map showing communities that have been officially designated by CARB as disadvantaged per Senate Bill 535. These areas include the aforementioned Port, Border, and El Cajon communities, but also all of San Diego County's tribal areas. For the first time, the 2022 RACS presents ozone information in some of our region's under-resourced communities. In particular, the RACS looks at two communities, Portside and the International Border, that are now in CARB's Community Air Protection Program. The tables on the screen identify census tracts that comprise each community, as well as their CalEnviroscreen scores. The tables also include each tract's overall ozone percentile score in bold, which compares ozone levels in each tract against all others in California. For both communities, all but one tract have ozone scores below 30%, meaning these areas experience ozone levels that are lower than 60 to 75% of other census tracts found in California. This trend is consistent with our understanding of how ozone forms in San Diego County, with much of it occurring in our inland foothills. While encouraging, these same areas can and still exceed health-based ozone standards at times. This map shows the same county-wide ozone scores as found in CalEnviroscreen and overlays the designated disadvantaged communities determined by SB 535. The Portside and border areas are in green, which are on the lower end of the ozone level spectrum, while many tribal areas, which are located at higher inland elevations, are in orange and have higher ozone percentile scores. Again, this is further indication and evidence of the dynamic of ozone formation in San Diego County. The 2022 RACS also looks at mobile ozone monitoring data collected in 2019 by ACLIMA on Priuses in the Portside community. During the 9-month study period, ozone level data was collected along most streets in the area and never exceeded 0.040 parts per million. Again, this is encouraging since the health-based state standard for ozone is 0.070 parts per million. However, ozone exceedances can and still do occur on occasion, and other air pollution impacts from diesel particulate matter and toxic air contaminants still occur. That is why APCD and other local agencies are working to improve the quality of life in these areas and other under-resourced communities in the county. The next section in the 2022 RACS discusses the complicated relationship between ground level ozone and greenhouse gases and climate change. The greenhouse effect is the main cause of global warming, as shown in the picture on the right. GHGs trap heat in the atmosphere and keep the Earth warmer than usual. This can lead to impacts such as more intense heat waves, drought, weather events, and wildfires, just to name a few. Carbon dioxide, methane, and fluorinated gases are the predominant GHGs, but ozone is also considered a greenhouse gas as well, to a lesser extent. At the same time, ozone is also considered a criteria air pollutant by CARB and EPA. Since many activities emit both ozone precursor pollutants like VOC and NOx, as well as GHGs, reducing their emissions can have co-benefits to improving air quality. Despite this link, the reduction of ozone and GHGs has historically been treated separately. There have been few studies that have attempted to predict how ozone and climate change will interact with one another, the results of which have been inconclusive. For example, some studies predict that hotter weather, more methane, and stagnant weather conditions could lead to more ozone formation in future years. Other studies cited by EPA have concluded that such predictions are far from certain and will be dependent on many factors to assess the true impact of future ozone levels. Such factors include difficulty in accurately predicting emission levels being transported into the US from other countries that are reducing emissions. Another factor includes uncertainty in predicting impacts due to climate change in the short term. Most climate change projections are 30 to 80 years into the future, while most ozone level projections only go out as far as 20 years due to meteorological uncertainty. And finally, it's possible that hotter temperatures could actually result in higher mixing elevations in the formation of ozone, which would reduce ozone levels near the ground in the future. Ultimately, this all means that there is no clear answer on how rising temperatures will impact future ozone concentrations in San Diego County. Despite this uncertainty, the fourth National Climate Assessment completed in 2018 studied this dynamic and determined that results will vary by region. Their study concluded San Diego County would see very minimal impacts to ozone levels by 2050 and 2090, resulting in possible increases of only 0.002 parts per million or lower. Though not insignificant, this predicted increase is likely to be counterbalanced by future emission reductions through additional regulations, incentives, and fleet turnover. The 2022 RACS also describes new opportunities where APCD could further reduce GHGs and describes where APCD thinks the region may be heading by 2045. New opportunities include new incentive programs at APCD that are on the horizon, including programs to purchase commercial zero-emission lawn and garden equipment, and our forthcoming Clean Cars for All program to purchase EVs in under-resourced communities. It also involves working together with regional partners and collaboratives to assist in implementing policies that support regional initiatives, such as the county's Regional Decarbonization Framework. These new opportunities will support a region that will be transformed by 2045 to have a local economy powered by clean renewable electricity, a transportation sector led by ZEVs and active transportation options, carbon-free buildings that are infill to avoid suburban sprawl and located near transit, and natural lands that are preserved as carbon sinks. Combined, these efforts will further reduce emissions to tackle our region's ozone and climate change challenges at the same time. The 2022 RACS also describes how the district is addressing ozone pollution from mobile sources, since they comprise over 60% of total precursor emissions in the county. While CARB has implemented the strictest controls on mobile sources in the nation, APCD also reduces mobile source emissions in non-regulatory ways. These include our robust incentive program, which has provided over $157 million in funding since 1999 and reduced over 13 tons of emissions per day in that timeframe. That is roughly equivalent to having removed approximately 6 million cars from operating on the road. Such programs include our Carl Moyer program, which replaces old equipment with cleaner technology. It also includes our mobile source enforcement program to assist CARB in implementing state regulations, and our forthcoming strategy to reduce mobile source emissions from indirect sources like ports and warehouses. Such efforts further technology advancement, help local businesses, and help the region attain ozone standards in a timely manner. Moving forward, APCD will look at additional ways where we can reduce emissions from mobile and other sources of pollution that are still within our regulatory authority. These include enhanced opportunities for outreach and education, development of regional best practices, developing partnerships with regional and private entities, and advocating at the legislative level when needed. It also includes APCD's continued support of transportation control measures that are implemented by SANDAG to support state and federal air quality plans. These TCMs expand transit options, van and carpool programs, biking and walking facilities, and traffic signal improvements, just to name a few. Moving on to Section 6, our ozone pollution control strategy, the 2016 RACs set forth a number of proposed measures to further reduce ozone precursor emissions. 7 measures were ultimately adopted or amended, as shown on the screen. Together, these measures resulted in ozone precursor emission reductions of 2.3 tons per day. The 2022 RACs proposes to schedule and adopt or amend up to 8 additional rules to further reduce NOx and VOC directly and GHG and PM indirectly over the next 3 years. These measures include some that are required by federal or state law, such as our forthcoming landfill flare rule and possible updates to our turbine and engine rules to adjust to new EPA startup and shutdown policies. It also includes measures included in the Portside Community Emissions Reduction Plan, or CERP, such as updates to our marine coding rule and the possible indirect source rule. On the right side of the chart, you'll see we've scaled the possible emission reductions and possible cost to implement for each of these measures, though further refinement will be needed during the rule development process. Together, if all of the proposed scheduled measures are adopted or amended, APCD anticipates the measures will further reduce ozone precursor emissions by at least 0.6 additional tons per day. All of the fossil fuel combustion measures, if adopted, will also inevitably result in indirect reductions of GHGs and PM. APCD also looked at additional measures that are not yet ready to schedule as proposed measures and require further analysis over the next 3 years. These possible measures require more time to assess and are not likely to be scheduled for possible adoption or amendment until the next RACs update is completed. These measures include further controlling categories that we already regulate, such as metal parts, bulk gasoline terminals, and adhesives. It also includes several new categories the district has not regulated yet, such as metalworking fluids and miscellaneous small sources of NOx. We will also assess non-traditional categories for possible emission reduction opportunities, such as zero-emission furnaces and water heaters, and more controls on region-wide wood burning activity. Since these measures require more analysis, anticipated emission reductions and cost effectiveness are not yet known. One of the many attachments in the 2022 RACs that we wanted to highlight was Attachment L, which is a reevaluation demonstrating that state-based emission offsets are not required to attain state ozone standards. Emission offsets are created when a company is required to compensate for an increase in emissions in one area by decreasing emissions in another area. APCD previously had a state emission offset threshold in place, but it was repealed in the late 1990s and the no net increase approach was utilized. This demonstration reviews emission reductions at existing stationary facilities in prior years and compares it to new emissions from new or modified stationary sources of pollution. So long as emissions from existing facilities outweigh any emission growth, a state offset program is not required under state law. The district has included a no net increase demonstration in each RACs update since 1998 as required by law. The 2022 RACs includes another demonstration and has once again determined that state emission offset thresholds remain unnecessary to attain state ozone standards as early as practical. However, to ensure the district is prepared for any such challenges in preparing this demonstration in the future, the 2022 RACS also includes a further study measure to consider reinstitution of a state emission offset threshold and a corresponding offset program in the future. Altogether, the 2022 RACS includes a robust ozone pollution control strategy through 2026 that will achieve additional and direct emission reductions beyond what was included in the previous RACS revision. It will also indirectly reduce GHGs and PM as a result of scheduled and further study measures. The anticipated emission reductions from the scheduled measures are expected to annually reduce numerous cases of negative health endpoints like asthma and over 800 lost work or activity days. At the same time, these measures are anticipated to contribute as much as $18 million to the local economy from avoided healthcare costs and lost productivity. The 2022 RACS also includes an environmental analysis prepared pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. The prepared EIR addendum is also available for review and comment through November 30th. The 1992 RACS EIR found that any potential adverse environmental impacts would be mitigated below a level of significance. Several supplements, negative declarations, and EIR addendums have followed that analysis whenever the RACS has been updated, with all finding that no substantial impacts would result because of the RACS or that no EIR revision is necessary. The 2022 RACS EIR addendum comes to the same conclusion, that no revision to the EIR is required because no significant adverse impacts are anticipated. Now that we've summarized the 2022 RACS, let's now discuss the next steps in the adoption process. Here's a tentative timeline. We held a kickoff workshop this time last year to start discussing the proposed concepts and measures you heard today. We also incorporated feedback received from our governing board members at a presentation in June. We released the draft RACS document and CEQA analysis on October 24th and presented to the AB 617 Portside Community Steering Committee the day after. Today's presentation is the third outreach presentation we are conducting over the next month to get feedback. We will also be presenting to the International Border Community Steering Committee on November 16th. As mentioned, our comment deadline is November 30th for both documents. After incorporating and responding to feedback through a workshop report by the end of this year, the district will then submit the RACS for governing board consideration in March 2023, followed by submittal to CARB if approved. If you wish to stay up to date on this process or other federal air quality planning processes, I highly encourage you to visit our website at the tiny URL link on the screen. That will bring you to APCD's air quality planning webpage, where the 2022 RACS is held, as well as our federal ozone plans. The same website also includes fact sheets that you can download that discuss the facts about ozone in our region, as well as some simple ways that you can reduce air pollution in your home. My contact information is on the slide, as well as my supervisors, in case you have any questions, concerns, or need to follow up with us on anything. So we've covered a lot today. And again, we appreciate you being here with us this afternoon and fitting this into your busy schedules. But now it's time to hear from you. So as a reminder, if you wish to make a verbal comment at this time, you're welcome to do so when prompted by APCD staff. Please press the raise hand button on your screen or mobile device if you wish to be added to the queue to speak. The host will then unmute you when you're prompted to speak. If you're using your phone, press *9 to indicate that you would like to speak, and then when prompted by the host, press *6 to unmute and mute yourself. If you'd like to make written comments, please continue to use Zoom's chat feature. If you would like to ask APCD a question, please use the Zoom Q&A feature. And so with that, I'll go ahead and toss it to my colleague, Eric Luther, who will be facilitating our comment and question session. Go for it, Eric.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So as Nick mentioned, you can raise your hand to speak or type in a question in the Q&A or the chat, and then I can read those questions out loud. Currently not seeing any questions or raised hands, so we'll give it a few minutes.
Sounds good. And like I said, any comments, questions, suggestions are welcome. And we can certainly field questions or comments offline as well, if that's if that people feel more comfortable with doing that after the presentation today.
Okay, still not seeing any raised hands. Oh, okay, we have one question that was typed into the Q&A. It's from anonymous attendee. Why is there no planned outreach for the communities affected by ozone exceedance days?
That's a good question. I think what we had intended to do was to, we have been conducting altogether we would have had 4 workshops, all virtual. And at the end of this comment period, we also sent letters to all of our permit holders, which include the areas that are affected. And so we believe we've have a good coverage of those areas. However, if there's any other places or groups that would like to hear about the plan, or if there's anything that we can do to further outreach to those communities, we're certainly welcome to go in there and provide some more information to those groups. So if that is something that is of interest, please do contact me after the meeting, and we can certainly get something set up to do that.
Okay, Nick, and looks like there was a follow-up question to that. Since the highest area of concern is alpine, what are we doing there?
Right, that's a good question. So because ozone is the emissions that are comprised of ozone are being emitted in the areas that are outside of alpine, or basically along the coastline is where much of the emission activity occurs. And so really to improve the air quality in alpine, we have to go after the emission sources that are where they are. And that will prevent a lot of the transport that will go into alpine, where the ozone then forms around that area. So we do that through local regulations, or I should say local rules that APCD adopts, where we further control emissions from stationary sources. CARB on the mobile source side will control emissions from cars, vehicles, off-road equipment, anything within their purview. And they have adopted probably the most stringent controls in the nation to do that. And then it also falls upon EPA to further reduce emissions from categories within their purview, which include things like ocean-going vessels, locomotives. There's certain categories that CARB cannot regulate at the moment. So it's imperative that EPA also gets reductions from those sources as well. So all of those combined are what will be needed to first reduce ozone precursor emissions in the areas where they're being emitted, and then as a result, the all air pollution conditions and ozone pollution in alpine should improve as a result. And I think that was seen by in some of those charts in the first part of the presentation, that strategy has worked in the last 40 to 50 years to further improve the ozone levels that we're seeing at alpine. So hopefully that answers the question, but I'm certainly welcome to follow up with that.
Okay, so currently seeing no raised hands or questions in the Q&A or chat boxes. Okay, we got another from anonymous attendee. Stationary sources do not even show up on the sources listed, but for some reason regulation is being suggested for stationary sources.
I'm not, if the commenter could maybe clarify on where the, what they're referring to on where that's not listed, that would help. But I can try to answer the question on why the regulations in this particular plan are only going after stationary sources when it appears that they're not a huge contributor to the ozone pollution problem. It's basically a matter of what is in our APCD's control to regulate. You know, and certainly stationary sources are within our purview to do. We are not able to go after mobile sources and get reductions from those types of vehicles. That falls between CARB and EPA. So within the district's purview, we have to try and reduce emissions from the sources that we can to improve public health. And that means stationary sources. And this particular plan is designed to do that. And it falls back to California Health and Safety Code, where we are tasked with adopting all feasible measures that are cost effective and technologically feasible to further improve ozone pollution levels here in the county until we're in attainment. So that is our primary responsibility in producing this plan. And that is why we're proposing to adopt measures that we are considering that could further reduce emissions.
Okay. Still waiting for any raised hands or more Q&A or chat questions.
And just a reminder, if anybody is, you know, if anybody wants to speak, you're more than welcome to. Just go ahead and press the raise hand, and then we can certainly hear your feedback, questions, concerns, open to whatever comments that you may have.
Okay, we have a Q&A question from Frank Spurgeon. Alpine is the only site in San Diego County at a higher elevation. Are there any future plans to extend the current monitoring network to higher elevation areas in the county, particularly near disadvantaged communities?
You know, I'm not sure if there's any direct plans to do that, but I do know that we have one of our monitoring leads on the line, David Soderman. I don't know if you're able to speak. I can't see the screen right now.
Yeah. Hi, this is
Okay.
David Soderman. This is, I'm the chief of our monitoring and technical services division. At this time, there are no current plans to add another high altitude or high elevation site within the county. But that's definitely something that we can look at. EPA requires the district to evaluate our monitoring network every 5 years. And the last time we did this was in the summer of 2020. And at that time, the evaluation tool that we used that was provided by EPA suggested no new monitoring sites in the area. That plan is in on our website if you want to look at it, but that's definitely something that as ozone changes, we'll be reevaluating that again in a couple of years to look at to see if any additional monitoring sites would be needed.
And on the question of other disadvantaged community monitoring, David, would it be correct to say that we are going to be doing some additional monitoring at least within the international border area, I believe?
That is correct.
I think, right?
Yeah, and I think in looking at your presentation there, Nick, I think this comment is more going to be about a lot of the tribal lands that are up in the higher elevations that have higher ozone exceedances. There is a couple, like I think up in the Pala up in northern San Diego County. They do operate their own network, and they do have a couple ozone monitors in that area. And I believe there's another ozone site further east in Alpine at another tribal territory out there. And that data is part of an EPA regional network for tribal lands. And they do see exceedances just like we do at Alpine.
And one additional note that I believe I came across a recent funding award notice from EPA that it seemed like a couple of tribal areas here in San Diego County did recently receive some funding from EPA to further monitor air quality in their areas. I don't have the names of those tribal areas offhand, but I know there was a couple that were located in San Diego County that
that's correct. I believe one of them was the Paula one, but there was one in North County, and then there was one in East County. And like I said,
it was the Paula band got 232,000 and change, and the Manzanita band got 229,000 and change.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Frank. But we can certainly chat offline too, if there's further questions about, what we're doing here on the monitoring side. Or feel free to chime in.
Okay, and Frank did say yes, thank you. There are two additional Q&A questions from anonymous attendee. While modeling is not required by the Clean Air Act, does APCD plan to conduct modeling to better understand how emission sources lead to high ozone levels at inland locations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at this time, APCD isn't planning to do any additional monitoring for the purposes of this plan. As I indicated in the presentation, we did just have the California Air Resources Board conduct modeling as part of our 2020 federal plan, and that did look at all sources, including stationary, coastal, inland sources, basically every emission source, to determine when we would attain both state and federal ozone standards, and that did conclude that we're forecast to attain the state 8-hour ozone standard in the 2032 timeframe. So at this point, that is the data that we'll be using. Modeling is a costly and effort to do, and so we were really appreciative of CARB to help us out on the modeling side for our federal plan. But we are not planning to conduct modeling for the RACs at this time, given that we have modeling results that are very recent and should use the same emission inventories that are being used in the RACs and the federal plan.
Okay, one additional question from anonymous attendee. Are there grants being provided for meeting regulation requirements in areas that are not shown as a need for regulation? Not sure if I understand that question, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand that question either. If whoever posted that question could maybe clarify that, that would be good. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. Are there any additional questions or comments, Eric? Well, maybe that person is.
Yeah, no other raised hands or no other questions in the Q&A or the chat.
We'll give it another minute, and whoever made the comment, you're certainly welcome to, we can unmute yourself and we can try and better understand your question, if that's easier. if rather than typing it out, that's certainly welcome too. So feel free to do so if you like to do that.
Oh, that looks scary. Hi, this is Kathy Kean at the Air District. I was going to just mention, since the question mentions grants for meeting regulation requirements, I was just going to mention that we do have several grant programs available. They typically are used to encourage people to go above and beyond the regulatory requirements established by local, state, and federal regulation. So if your question is, are there grants being provided for meeting regulatory requirements? Yes, and those are available region-wide. They are available for people who are interested in going in meeting those regulatory requirements earlier than the regulation requires. But as Nick mentioned, we're certainly happy to follow up with you if you're interested in learning more about those programs.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Kathy. And like I said, whoever made the comment, if that didn't touch on where you were kind of going with that question, please do reach out to us and we can further clarify.
Okay, so right now, not seeing any raised hands or any other questions in the Q&A or chat.
Okay. I think we'll give it another couple seconds here to make sure that we've got any last minute questions or concerns, if anybody has them. Last chance. I say last chance, but there's plenty of time to provide us comments after this workshop. So like I said, feel free to reach out to us if that is something that you'd like to do offline as well. That's certainly welcome. Are there any other ones, Eric?
Still not seeing any additional questions.
Okay. Well, I think we can probably, I'll just do a couple closing points here, and then if anybody has any last minute comments, we can certainly respond to them. But I think we'll go ahead and start closing things out. So I do want to thank everyone again for attending tonight. A recording of the presentation will be going up on APCD's YouTube account after this presentation. We'll also be emailing a workshop report to all the attendees that provided an email address to us today. That will be coming out in a few months. And that will go ahead and wrap things up. Maybe just one last check with Eric, just to make sure if there's any last minute comments that have come in.
Still not seeing any comments or questions.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and finish up today's workshop, everyone. Thank you for attending and appreciate your time with being here today for this. So thank you. Thank you all.